Hey everyone, my name is Yvonne Leow. Thanks for joining us for our first ever President's Hangout. Get every former presidents, past and present, to just be talking about what does it mean to even be an AAJA president. So without further ado, let's get things started. And please feel free to be sending in your questions and we'll be responding to them live. I'm Yvonne. I am the current national president. My term ends this year in 2018. So really excited to have been serving for the last year and this year. I work for a local news publication called By the Bay. And it's just based in San Francisco and have just been involved with AAJA for more than a decade now. And I was just really excited to introduce our esteemed presidents. So Sharon, do you want to say hello and talk a little bit about? Sharon?
Can you hear me? You're coming in and
yep.
out. Hi. Hey, Yvonne, thanks for organizing this, and thanks to everyone who's joining this and may be interested in serving AAJA at a national level. I'm Sharon Chan. I was national president from 2009 to 2010. I'm coming to you from Seattle, where I'm the vice president for innovation, product, and development at the Seattle Times.
Thanks, Sharon. Doris, please say hello.
Hi, I'm Doris Truong. I am coming to you from Arlington, Virginia. I'm a homepage editor at the Washington Post, and I was the national president of AAJA from 2011 through 2012.
Awesome. So I'll be moderating today and really just focusing the conversations with Doris and Sharon. Paul Cheung may be joining us a little later, so don't be surprised if he pops in. But first off, just wanted to get a better sense, like before you were president, what was your involvement in AAJA? Doris?
Okay. Well, I've actually been an AAJA member since I was in college. I have been a member since 1996, and I've been to every national convention of AAJA except for 1998. So it's been a long time of involvement for me, and I've been, I served in multiple capacities in chapter leadership before I joined the national board of AAJA in 2003. And I rose up to become the secretary, where I was reelected to that position in 2009, and then I became the president in 2011.
I'll go next. I was not the diligent, studious member that Doris Truong was. In fact, it was actually the Seattle Times that forced me to get involved with AAJA. Like, hey, Unity is happening in Seattle 1999. You're a journalist of color, so you need to go. And it was actually members like Doug Kim, Lily Eng, Alex McLeod, who basically said you need to be a part, and Janet too, who said you need to be an AAJA member. So I was an off and on member from 99, and then I did the executive leadership in 2003, and I really saw the value of the organization and how it helped me. So after that, I ran for chapter president. I did that for 2 years. I served on the advisory board, then on the governing board, and then I ran for national president. So, and then after that, I continued to serve on the Unity board. So roughly, I have about 10 years of active volunteer service as an AAJA member.
That's pretty incredible. No, yeah, thanks for sharing a little bit of your history. My personal experience, I got involved sophomore year in college at UCLA, was active in the LA chapter, never actually served at the chapter level, but when I moved to Arizona, got really plugged into AAJ there. It was just like, who are the AAJ members? I don't know anyone in Phoenix. And was really excited to meet Michelle Lee, Abe Kwok, Amy Wang, to name a few members. And Abe like really actually encouraged me to then get involved at the national level. And that's how I got involved at the National Advisory Board. And I'll just never forget that experience because it was just such a classic example of mentors in AAJA, like reaching down and like really pulling like younger members up into positions that personally I didn't feel like I was qualified for. But I think that is the beauty of AAJA, is just being part of this community where they just genuinely believe in you and your ability to be a better journalist, to be a better leader. And from there, was involved in the advisory board member, ran for VP of Journalism Programming, and then senior VP, and then ultimately ran for president.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like Yvonne, you and I had a similar experience, and I think many AJ members have this too, which is that veteran members really are active and key in cultivating us and encouraging us to think of ourselves as leaders of the organization. And I remember I went to this fund development workshop, fundraising workshop when I was chapter president, and the coach, the trainer there said that your most important job as a leader of a in a nonprofit is to replace yourself. Like that
Yeah.
actually comes before raising any money. So I really took that. I think that's all really super important for us to remember. Like as members now, even former leaders, I'm always thinking about how to cultivate future leaders, and that when you actually, if you just do that work of figuring out who's going to replace you and constantly giving those people the development opportunities, the support to do that, you actually will be doing an awesome job as an AJ leader.
Yeah, agreed. I love that. Before though, like kind of relatedly, I mean, why did you guys decide to run for the encouragement first? Were you thinking about it? Did it seem just like a really good opportunity you couldn't pass up? What was going through your mind before you started? And I especially remember back then, like there were campaigns, which I hope we could like go back to at some point one day, but I ran unopposed. So it was like a very different dynamic when you're just kind of like, I'll do it versus, you know what, I'm gonna run for it. I'm gonna go against someone and like really campaign my ass off to get people to vote for me. So Doris, you want to talk a little bit about your experience?
Yeah, so I campaigned in 2010, and I campaigned. My opponent was Neil Justin, who is now the Unity president, and he challenged me to really up my game and really explain to our membership why I thought it was the right time for me to be president. And besides that contested race, I also really had strong support from Sharon, who really encouraged me to run. But I also had a lot of support from my newsroom. The Washington Post's executive editor at the time, Marcus Broccoli, was particularly supportive throughout my presidency, giving me the time that I needed to be successful, giving me the financial resources to travel and to not have to worry about my job while I was doing AAJA, which is its own job.
You know, that actually, before we transition to you, Sharon, you mentioned like a really great point is the support from your employer. And how did that conversation go? I mean, a lot of folks, when they're going to a convention, often have to broach that conversation of like even going to an AAJ event. So what does it mean to be committing to something at such a national and now international scale? And like what did you find the response was?
Well, I think that I've been really lucky because the Washington Post is a newsroom that really strongly values diversity. And they saw that the success of anybody from their newsroom in a high leadership position at AAJ or any other journalism organization such as that reflects well back on the organization, reflects well back on the newsroom. And I had already been an officer in AAJA for a while at that point. I had been secretary for 2.5 years. And so they were accustomed to supporting my work and seeing the recruiting that I was doing on their behalf, seeing the leadership and mentorship that I was providing to other members within our newsroom through my work in AAJA.
Great. And Sharon, what inspired you to run for president?
Oh, the mission. I mean, I believe really deeply in the mission of AAJA to encourage Asian Americans to enter the field of journalism, to increase the number of newsroom leaders of of Asian descent, and to ensure fair and accurate coverage of Asian Americans in the media. So I would say number one, the mission. Number two, I wanted to give back and challenge myself. I think it's always really important to be thinking at all points in your life, like, when's the last time I did something that scared me? And this was something that Raju Narasetti said at the AAJ Philadelphia convention. And I thought that was a really good point. And I didn't realize it at the point. I hadn't realized it and articulated that in my head in that way. But I think when you're ready for that type of challenge. And then I think the third reason is really like I was so inspired by the Asian American women leaders that I'd seen lead AAJA. From seeing Kat Camilla get on stage at the Unity 99 convention, the same stage that presidential candidates came on to address the conference, that Gary Locke spoke at, that Ron Sims spoke at. And she just made such a powerful speech about telling our story. And I really think, and then seeing Mei Chang as president, Jeannie Mariani Belding, I wanted to be like them. And I wanted to serve the Asian American journalism community like that, like they did, and to give back. So I think those were really the three reasons I decided to do it.
I mean, those are all really great reasons. I'll speak for myself. It's too bad Paul's not here, because I do think he was really informative of my decision to run too. Paul had been service president for 4 years, 2 terms back to back. I think that's
unprecedented. He was the only president to have run for re-election.
Such an overachiever. But I think it was mostly like working under him and like, or with him on the governing board, really seeing like how he was trying to push AAJA in like this direction, like structuring a lot of our programs, like putting a little bit more oomph to them. But also at the same time, just like the type of attitude that he had in terms of collaboration and team building. I mean, a lot of it, like, I think being a national president at AAJA is also just working very closely with your executive team and the board. Mm-hmm. And so like being a part of that just made the transition far easier. And I'm always super grateful that he continues to stay involved, and that has helped me not only like challenge myself, like what you were talking about, Sharon, but also feel like I wasn't going to drown at any point. And I think that would be the case for the next president too, is like we're constantly trying to continue this pipeline, right? Where it's like a lot of people with institutional knowledge of AAJA, while also making sure like a lot of young new leaders are stepping in, new members are given the opportunity to really like flex their muscle. So I also really felt like there was just like give it a shot and push the organization in a way that I felt it needed to go. And the opportunity, while it was like 2 years long, I think has just been tremendous. Like we're really able to implement a lot of change. I don't know. Do you guys identify with that?
Yes. I mean, I think that I also think that one of the other things that probably drives everyone who runs for AAJA president is you see problems that need to be solved.
Yeah.
Right. And if you see problems that need to be solved, whether it's we need to get the website redesigned to, how are we changing to adapt to the digital realities of where the news industry is, like, to just advocating. I mean, for me, it was like a massive attrition of journalists and Asian American journalists from the industry during the Great Recession and the downturn in the news industry. And I feel really fortunate to have been in the position to be able to call up the editors of those newsrooms when they announced they were making cuts and say, where's diversity in your priority list when you're making these cuts? And to call up even like the president of the Newspaper Guild of America and say that to them. So there is an enormous opportunity to have impact. And I think each of those has that impact in different ways based on where the organization was and what were kind of the outside circumstances in that way at that time.
Yeah, Doris,
for me, it was
stories to add too.
Yeah, for me, it was really important to revamp our handbook for covering Asian America. And I think that is persisting as a resource for people around the world in terms of what's fair and accurate when they are covering Asian American and Pacific Islander communities. I remain active in our Media Watch committee. And usually when we reach out to somebody, even if it's to applaud them for good work, we will refer them back to that handbook because it's not meant to be comprehensive, but it is meant to point out particular sticky issues that are frequently encountered when people are trying to cover Asian America and Pacific Islanders. And then one of the other things that was really key for me was personally reaching out to our membership. So I had made it a goal to travel to all of our 21 chapters during my presidency, and I met it. One of the lasting legacies from that was that I had sort of strategically chosen cities in Asia to visit. And I reported back to the chapter president at the time, Ken Moritsugu, that all his members were saying, how can we have events in Asia? And I said, you can have events, you just need to organize them. And so now they're in, I don't know, their 6th year of the N3Con, which is this digital conference that is, you know, they actually have people come together in, usually in Hong Kong, but it brings together hundreds of people from multiple countries. And that's one of their big fundraisers, one of their big things that they can give back to journalists in the AAJA chapter, and people from the US will travel to it. So that was something that stemmed from Ken being given the feedback that the AAJA chapter wants to do things. And now that's one of our biggest, most thriving chapters.
That's an excellent point, Doris, because I think every presidential administration under AAJA pretty much is structured very differently. So you mentioned like the Washington Post supported you. I'm actually a co-founder of my own startup, so I don't have that institutional backing. And so the decisions that I'm making for how I'm invested in AAJA are slightly different. But I am curious to hear how you two were thinking about like how to spend your presidency, and also just what are the basic responsibilities of being an AAJA president. Sharon, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. So how do you spend your time as president? What are your basic responsibilities? Before that, I do just want to reflect on something Doris said, which is about empowering people, right? Whether that's AAJA, AAJA members. I think that's actually the biggest way you can have an impact, is really going back to what you said, Yvonne, about reaching down to that next generation of leaders and encouraging and supporting them, or even at a national level, empowering that chapter leader. Or for me, like one of the most rewarding things was empowering Kathy Chow to become our executive director of AAJA, and being able to see where she's been able to support and take the organization in a totally different direction. How I spent my time as president, I mean, there's like the standard 3 governing board meetings you need to go to. I would say that like I would set aside time, like about 4 hours every Saturday, where I would just have office hours at work, actually, so I didn't do this at home, where I took care of AJ business. I did phone calls at that time, and then there's just the ongoing like responding to emails during the week, right? Like I think on Sunday I chose not to do any AAJ work as well. I would say like things, I was overtaken really by events of America. You know, I started out thinking my presidency was going to be about repositioning AAJ for the digital future, and it wasn't. It turned out it was going to be about identifying the right leadership at the national office, going, you know, when we didn't have the right leadership at the beginning of my term, to finding interim leadership, to finding future permanent leadership. It was about supporting journalists who were losing their jobs. And then it turned into, how do we advocate for journalists who were being imprisoned in Iran and North Korea? So for me, I think like, and I think everyone probably has a set idea of what they're going to focus on. And really being a leader is just being able to flex and adapt to what is the most important thing I can do to serve the mission of AAJ. Like at one point, I flew to Hawaii to be with our chapter of Hawaii members when the Honolulu Advertiser closed, and that merged with the Star Bulletin. I really could not have predicted that. I remember Kat Kamiya, one of the Stan Chen died during her presidency, so she had to haul her butt across the country to Portland for that funeral. So I think I think you can have an idea of and a North Star, but ultimately, like it's going to be about responding to what's at hand while trying to keep the organization oriented towards that North Star.
I think when we're talking about unforeseen challenges, one of the things that came up during my presidency was that Unity, which is a coalition of journalism organizations, repositioned itself, and the membership components of that organization changed. We welcomed in the NLGJA, the LGBT journalism organization. The Black journalists and the Hispanic journalists ended up leaving Unity, but AAJA has been in it since the founding of Unity, as well as the Native American journalists. So having to work across the various politics of that and maintaining a strong relationship with the organizations that are no longer a part of Unity was still very important to the mission of AAJA, because all of the journalism associations still need to work together, even if we're not necessarily part of the same coalition.
Yeah, so I feel really lucky just kind of hearing your stories, Sharon and Doris, because one, I think because of the executive restructure that we've had under Paul's term. Oh, well, speak of Paul. Hey, Paul, can you hear us? All
Yeah, I
right.
can hear you.
Okay, great. Well, I was actually just mentioning your name because we were talking about like what is the role that a national president has to fulfill. And Sharon and Doris kind of both reacted and just shared their stories about how they actually came in thinking that they were going to accomplish X, but they really had to be responsive with the industry and deal with Y. And I was just going to say from my personal experience, and then Paul will talk about yours, is that because of the restructuring at the executive level, I felt really confident in being able to lean into the executive officers to handle a lot of what I think was once part more involved for the president. And so a stronger VP of journalism programs really has been able to like work with Voices, JCamp, ELP, co-directors. So much has changed them now. Like the VP of Civic Engagement, Pia, has been able to handle um, media watch issues that it doesn't feel as much of like a responsibility where I have to plug into everything, but I also know like this is just an incredible luxury. So a lot of the ideas that we've been able to implement, at least in the past year or so, has actually just been new stuff. Hasn't been as reactive, but is constantly like the redesign, like figuring out catalyst, media entrepreneurship. I think a lot of that is to be taken into consideration. Is just thinking about how to manage and build a team that can help accomplish those goals too. And I think Paul can probably speak to this too, is just like how to like restructure an organization that is as historic as AAJA, but also needs to continue to evolve to like all these new demands, whether it's digital, mobile, virtual reality, whatever the case may be. But so, Paul, can you talk a little bit about just introduce yourself, what years you served? We know it's 4, and tell us what you do now, and maybe just tell us a little bit about your experiences as president.
Sure. So I'm Paul Cheung. I'm currently the Director of Visual Journalism at NBC News. I was AAJ's president, I believe, 2013 to 2016.
It
It
all
seems
goes by so
like
fast.
it seems like it's a million years ago. Um,
Oh,
I think because you guys are doing such great jobs. I think there is a lot of assumption in terms of what the president does and does not do. And I think, no president is sort of alone. We sort of built upon our predecessors' success, right? So with the work that Doris, Sharon, and all the other previous presidents have done, it basically, during my 2 terms, it allowed me the luxury to really stop being as reactive as they say they were, but really start thinking about how do we lay the foundation and infrastructure so that AJ could be as consistent as possible. I think one of the things that I quickly realized, as anyone who's want to run for AJ president, is most of the benefit you would not see during your term. You really see those benefits basically after you're gone, right? So it's great to know that you, Yvonne, have time to focus on new initiative because the way we structure AAJA is now so stable that now we're able to move forward rather than maintain and to make sure that all of our program could still run and there's no major hiccups, right? So I think that was the big thing that I learned is a lot of what you implement today you might not see the return on investment immediately, but it will come down the line.
and thanks, Paul. And just really quickly, why did you decide to run for president? Twice, but maybe the first time. And then, yeah, talk about why you decided to rerun.
Oh, I was looking for meaning in my life. I don't know. Um, it was just the perfect timing. I think at that point I was really sort of growing frustrated in terms of what's going on in the industry. There's lack of diversity, and there's also a lack of people who look like me, right? I'm an immigrant from Hong Kong, and even when you think about Asian American Journalists Association, not very often you're going to see a president or someone in leadership role that has an accent who's completely, I'm not even first generation, I'm half generation here. So really about representation, and also as a career development, we think about what is it that I could do, and how do I work with people who, in theory, doesn't have to listen to you, right? Like everyone is a volunteer, but really exercise your leadership skills and try to make an impact to an industry that could use more diversity. And in terms of the second term is more about, really fulfilling, a vision and a mission, right? I feel like in order for AAJA to finish the restructure and to really launch some of the new initiative, I want to spend 2 more years to stabilize the structure and make sure that the structure is intact. Because a lot of times, all of our term is 2 years, and 2 years may seem a lot, but it go by really quickly. And what I don't want is basically everything that all the other presidents have to work for suddenly sort of like swing back into, the past, but, really consistently be able to move forward.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm only a year into it, but I will say the first year for me has just been so far spent learning, just meeting a lot of new sponsors. And I think that was probably going to segue really nicely to the next question, which is like, what was the most surprising thing you learned about the presidency or your presidency? And mine was actually realizing like how sponsor intensive it would be. I knew that I'd be working very closely with Kathy, the executive director in the national office, but it was really, I felt like a role of the president is to represent, advocate, and fundraise. And I think that was actually part of the skills, like a set of skills that I really had to like train for. Doris, you kind of were nodding your head. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, or what was the most surprising thing that you discovered when you were president?
Let me think on what was most surprising. But yeah, the fundraising was not necessarily a surprise to me because I had already been involved for more than 7 years at that point, and on a national board level with AAJA. And so I had grown accustomed to constantly looking for opportunities that would be good sponsorship partnerships for AAJA. What I think was a bit surprising about that is just how many of those conversations you as a president are personally involved in. So you're speaking at a high level with CEOs of corporations, like you're talking to the vice president of diversity at GM, or you're talking to the publisher of some major news organization, or you're talking to the VP of NBC News, things that you wouldn't necessarily have expected. Also, you're thinking about what are some ways to get organizations involved in AAJA when they might not have previously been involved. So some of the sponsorship conversations that happened under my presidency included talking to various branches of the armed services about how they might set up booths at our career fair. So, it's a wide-ranging job, fundraising, but the work that AAJA does is so important. And even though we have a lot of volunteers working on it, it still takes money to provide these member services. So I think that that's one of the things, is that you really understand the bottom line a lot more. Like when people say, what am I paying for my convention registration? Or why are we staying at this hotel when I can be staying at a cheaper hotel? You really understand what is going into it and why those are the best options that are the most cost effective to allow us to do the best that we can for our membership.
Yeah, I mean, Sharon, you were leading AAJA through a pretty tumultuous time in journalism, if I recall. And these economics really matter. Can you talk a little bit about that and your experience diving into that? Was that something you were pretty familiar with and you expected, or? What happened?
I had fundraised before for an endowment for a scholarship in Seattle, so I was familiar with doing that, at least on an individual level. I mean, just to take us back, fall of 2008, the Great Recession began. Newspapers started realizing that print advertising was disappearing and really never coming back. So really, I mean, when they're going to decide, am I going to keep this reporter or sponsor buy $100,000 sponsorship at an AAJA convention or $25,000 sponsorships at each of the four conventions, it's a pretty easy call for them. So for us, I mean, AJ, we were really in survival was not necessarily assured at that point. So yes, like there was a ton of money spent working with sponsors, which I actually love doing. So it was not a burden. But I will say the biggest surprise is really what does it mean? You really don't understand what it's like. What does it mean to operate with the world on your shoulders until you serve in a position as president of a nonprofit or the CEO of your own company, right? Like for 12 months of that, it was unclear who even our ED was going to be leading AJ forward. So I did really feel like it was all on me. And, you know, you feel this intense pressure of there's this incredible legacy, 30-year history of AJ behind me. I don't really want this to fall apart on my watch. And then not only that, you're operating without the safety net. Most of us work for large companies, right? Large news companies. Even the Seattle Times is a medium-sized company. I have an HR department. If I have a problem with someone on my team, there are like 20 people I can go talk to for advice, right? If something's going off the rails with my budget, I go talk to my CFO. And really, there really is nothing. You don't have any of that when you're serving as president of AAJ. So I will say the biggest surprise is understanding what is the responsibility of that. And I have a ton more respect for, you know, like the publisher of the Seattle Times now, or Catherine Graham when you're watching The Post, the movie, right? Like they actually have an immense responsibility, and that experience can't be replicated or quantified even when you're serving at a senior leadership level. And that's also, I will say, one of the most important lessons and biggest learns for me from serving as AAJ president, that I would not have been able to get no matter, you know, how many promotions I got at the Seattle Times.
So before we dive deeper into that, Paul, can you also share a little bit about what was the most surprising thing for your presidency?
I think the most surprising thing is, you know, again, echoing what Sharon and Doris are saying is, you know, while it seems like it's a really big job, at the same time, it's really about the relationship and the partnership that really matters. It's the relationship that you build with your ED. In essence, when you're the AAJ president, you are a CEO of a nonprofit, and you know you're CEO of a nonprofit that has an operating budget of more than $1.2 million annually. So how do you make sure you end up developing different sort of skill sets and appreciation? I mean, most people, I would say, in AAJ may not understand sort of like the inner workings of how AAJ function. And it's amazing how for the past 30 years, we're able to offer all these different programmings, right? For example, the Executive Leadership Program, Voices, our high school journalism program, Media Watch, all operating, you know, using volunteers and our very small staff. And I think that's what's really sort of, you know, surprising, because I think a lot of times when people look at AAJ, they think this is someone else's work, or you know, there is a whole team of people doing that. When the fact is, it comes down to like really a handful of really active members and very dedicated staff. So I think that's what's really surprising. At the same time, you know, what I found, you know, that's also surprising is, you know, fundraising for diversity is really, really hard, right? While it's a good thing to do, you have to really understand the business case. So I think one of the skills that, you know, I would say that all of us acquire is actually how do we frame diversity in the sense of a business case where it is smart business for them to support AAJA, because not only are we sustaining a future pipeline of news leader, but we could also be a source for, you know, for media company to do more responsible journalism. For example, you know, under your leadership, Yvonne, the Muslim American Task Force, which is a great service to the industry, right? So now how do we frame that without AAJA who else will be doing this? There is no other Asian American Journalists Association out there that will be advocating, on the fair and accurate coverage of Asian Americans and Muslim Americans. So it's really vital for us to present the business case to sustain AAJA. So I think those are some of the factors that I found very surprising.
Yeah, I mean, and now we should definitely talk about like some of the lessons that we learned. And I will totally echo a lot of the points that have already been made, but even with taking something like sponsorships and realizing that each company needs like a different type of sponsorship, and how do you pitch that? Really figuring out how to be a good salesperson too, and figure out how to solve their problems while also making sure that it's aligned with AAJ's mission, I think was a really incredible skill for me personally. And we'll also just add, like, serving as president has allowed me a newfound appreciation for the national office and really getting a better sense of like how much effort they put into recruiting for student applicants, for submitting foundation grants. And Kathy Chow is like very tirelessly making sure that we're hitting deadlines, being really prompt, like all the little details that you never really think about because it's not part of, even now, not part of my day to day, but it is very much baked into like how AAJ has to continue to thrive and operate. And I also say it's just like the business acumen that I've gained from understanding, okay, this is how a nonprofit works. These are the types of strategies that we can thinking the not only like the 2-year outlook for my presidency, but what comes, how do we position ourselves for the next generation? What does that pipeline look like? It is a combination of like short-term and long-term thinking that has like really pushed me to not only have that more strategic vision, but then also then tactically implement it too. So it is a really rare opportunity to kind of get your hands dirty and really work that deeply in a nonprofit. At the same time, very selfishly knowing that like this is a volunteer opportunity. Like unless I really, really, really mess up, which I still have time to do, like this is actually a really great supportive environment to like learn how to be a leader, to get really meaningful feedback from because they know that you're learning on it. I'm not getting paid, So in some ways I can't get fired, in some ways I can, but it's also just a great place to train up and develop yourself. Sharon, do you want to talk a little bit about like what you learned and what you gained? You kind of mentioned it in your last story.
Well, I mean, I would say what I gained is actually a little bit different from what I talked about before around kind of stewardship and financial stewardship of a storied organization and the responsibility around that. I think what I learned the most is how to work with people. Paul mentioned this earlier, but you're working with volunteers. I mean, you're president, but you can't really tell anyone to do anything. And you don't pay their paycheck. So you actually have to learn really quickly what is the art of leadership without really accountability or financial accountability. Like I remember royally screwing things up in interpersonal relationships when I was a chapter president. I mean, even when I first became president, I remember like royally screwing things up and not treating people in ways that I would want to be treated because I was trying to be efficient or I was tired. Let me just deal with this via email. And the great thing about AAJ is people will call you out on it. Right? Like the people you manage may not necessarily call you out on it. So it actually speeds up that learning cycle and you get very honest feedback right away. And people are incredibly generous with their mentoring time and guidance in a way that people in a workplace would not be. So, and then I will also add to that really kind of adding on those people skills like persuasion skills. How do you build relationships of trust very quickly, both with your own board as well as, say, with Unity board members? That was like a really incredible skill to learn that. You learn how to say sorry and thank you all the time. And I mean, I mentioned this on Facebook earlier, but AJ taught me so many leadership skills that MIT and business school did not teach me. And I was in this class full, like 121 senior leaders or directors at companies, and it was shocking how many people did not have basic people skills. And when I thought back to where I learned those from, it was really from my volunteer work as AAJ, from chapter president up through the advisory up to serving as president.
That's amazing. Yeah, really incredible. I think people really underestimate like this opportunity. And it's because it's kind of shrouded as like a volunteer nonprofit gig, but truly like the impact on the community and yourself as a journalist is pretty profound.
Yeah,
Doris.
I just want to add, like Doris talked about being in these conversations with vice presidents and publishers, and AAJ is an incredibly well-respected organization in the industry, in journalism. And that, I mean, you can call any single member up and get them on the phone. You can call, executives at news organizations and get them on the phone. So you're afforded this incredible access because you represent this organization that is so well known and trusted for its work and efficacy.
Well said. Doris, do you want to talk a little about what you learned as president?
Well, I think that you really grow in terms of how you project yourself publicly. And I think one of the things that I also learned was how to better separate my personal time and my private time, and how to not let frustrations come out sideways. Because when you're president, you kind of are always on, Sharon alluded to that a little bit, like you want to do things efficiently, but sometimes you've got to really slow down and make sure that everybody's on the same page. Or if they're not all going with you, then at least I understand why you're moving forward. So there's a lot of interpersonal relationships that have to be finessed there. And that will help you in any job that you're going to have later, because you're very unlikely to be working in a vacuum all by yourself, making all the shots. You're always going to be accountable to someone. Even if you work by yourself in your own startup, you still have people that you're accountable to. So that's one thing to think about. But to me, AAJA it's my family. I've been involved with this organization for more than 20 years. And it's because people in it have the same passion about journalism and have the same understanding about the challenges of being a diverse community that I do. And I think that's why I keep coming back to AAJ year after year after year. It's why I continue to be involved in AAJ Media Watch now. I mean, I could just be sitting back and doing nothing with AAJ, but I continue to be involved because I believe in the mission. I believe in our membership. And I think that it's one of the unique things about being president was being able to speak to people from every level. So you're talking to students who are in J Camp, so they're high school students, and then you're talking to people who retired from being CEOs. So you're talking to people who are very seasoned in the industry or very seasoned in helping AAJA, and you are able to kind of talk to all those same people on a level playing field. Like you can treat all of them with like the same deference, and you would be accorded that same kind of respect. And that's what's really great about this organization. And it persists afterward too.
The family diversity of experiences and people that you get to meet along the way. Paul, do you also want to share a little bit about what were some like the most important lessons that you learned serving as president?
I think there's practical skills that you end up acquiring besides the, people relationship, understanding the business side of industry and management and managing. I think, one thing, that it really taught me is how to just be a better listener, right? That's something that I don't think a lot of us do all the time, but as the AAJA president, you don't all. I think people have this perceived notion that you're the president, you get to do what you want, when in fact that's not true. I feel like most of the time you're basically figure out how to be facilitator so that you could facilitate the other AAJ leaders and the board to do the things that's needed so that AAJ could move forward. I mean, during the restructure, I remember we had, intense conversation about a particular direction of, how to reorg the officers, and there were a lot of disagreement. Rather than forcing, my own opinion is, I learned how to be a better listener and, figure that using that skill set to really come to a consensus so that we're all in agreement. We might not all agree sort of on some of the nuances, but we all agree that that's the right direction we're going. And I think that's a really valuable skill set that, as a journalist or as a future CEO of a media empire, or if you want to start your own company as a parent, I think, being a great listener and really developing that empathy and using that information to form and inform strategy is valuable.
So just to kind of like build on that, the next question I have is like, what do you guys think it makes a good president? Like, what kind of skills should people have coming into it? It sounds like a lot of us had previous experiences serving on the board, and I'll definitely say that it does help to have served at the national level in some capacity to kind of have a better understanding of the inner workings of AAJA. I think that's definitely something to consider. I also think that having a vision for the organization will probably help you implement and really figure out what you want to get accomplished if you decided to run for president. But I'll pass it to Sharon. Can you tell us a little about what you think makes a really great AAJ president?
Okay. Let's see. Well, first I would say it's really useful to go through the executive leadership program. I actually think the ELP teaches you most of what you need to do to serve as AAJ president. So if you haven't done that program and you're thinking about serving at any kind of national office level, I highly encourage that you do that, because not only does it teach you the skills to be a leader, it teaches you, it also kind of teaches you an appreciation for the organization. I think you kind of need to know the organization, right? Have a base knowledge as a member, have served in some sort of leadership capacity. I think Paul brought up a really great point about listening. And then and you brought up a really good point about vision. So what am I going to add to that? I feel like those are super important. I guess it's really like passion for the mission, because being president is really hard. And you're putting a lot of your free time behind it. I was fortunate. Was I married? Yes, I was married, but I didn't have kids. But doing that on top of being a reporter and running a blog, like, it's super intense. So you kind of really have to love the organization and love the mission and love diversity and committing your time to it. I actually think that's the most important thing. And then the other thing I will add to what all of you have said, which is super important, is do you want to develop people? Like, it's really, AJ is all about the people, whether it's where, Doris was a national officer who was a rock for me when I was serving as president, or, giving people leadership opportunities, encouraging them, because at the end of the day, that's really all it is. And I mean, we can talk about finances or fundraising or programs. I actually really believe the only legacy we leave are what lessons that we impart and the people that we empower. And so for me, it's really all about the people.
Well said. Doris, do you have anything else to add?
I don't really have anything to add to Sharon, other than to emphasize that really strongly believing in AAJ's mission is going to be key to your success as president.
Thanks. Paul?
Yeah, I completely agree with Sharon that, in fact, the ELP application is out and the deadline is February 25th. So I encourage everyone to apply. I think what makes a good president is you have to have, the right heart, right? Like, you want to make a change and you want to make an impact. you have to like people. You have to like all kind of people, and you have to have enough tolerance and grace to know that there will be people who would not like you, agree with you, but that's okay. Because that's what's great about AAJA is really embracing all these different voices. So if you're the type of people who doesn't like being criticized, or like I say, everyone who knows me, feedback is a gift. If you don't want that kind of gift, then that's probably not for you. But if you like feedback and you love that gift, then yes, you should definitely run to be AAJA president.
It's really funny because my boss, Frank Lethen, at the Seattle Times, one of the first things he said to me is like, "You're very good at taking feedback." And I'm like, yeah.
AAJA.
But you know what, I'm making it sound like a terrible thing, like people are constantly criticizing you. You know what? This is coming from people who have been members in the organization since the very first convention, right? These are not uninformed opinions that you are getting, right? It's coming from people who care really deeply about the organization and care really deeply about the mission and seeing AAJ be successful too. So I think it's not just like commenters on your online story who are trolling you. It is actually kind of in the spirit of what Doris said, which is feedback not feedback, but a family.
And yeah. I would add that you do get positive reinforcement as well. I mean, I do have a stack of thank you notes from an assortment of people, including some of our former J campers, and they weren't just generic thank you notes. They were very specific to some sort of takeaway that they got through the organization that was either something I facilitated or something that they took away from the time that we spent together. And so that means a lot to me. And I think that shows the power of the organization as well, is that people are moved to write thank you notes. I mean, people don't really do that very often anymore.
I want to add one more thing. What is another skill that you need to be a great president? And I will say this is true of Doris, of Paul, and Yvonne, is that you have to know how to be a great supporter. Right. And this is one of the key lessons that ELP teaches you. Do you know how to support other leaders? Because that is like a basic requirement of being a strong leader.
Agreed. I think ultimately is also, putting AAJA first and realizing that there's a lot to be gained individually and professionally, but this is really more of an opportunity for the president or whoever's serving in the leadership position at AAJA to like pass the buck forward and move it a little bit closer to the end game, which is like a more diverse industry and more diverse newsrooms. Paul, did you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I would say that, one of the, thing that I think about running for not just AAJA president, but, stepping up for any AAJA leadership role is there's always a give and get. You will get as much out of it as you give. So it's never really one directional. It is a relationship that you end up building over your entire career. And, one thing that, I emphasize, like AAJ will always have different people running it. And, you might not always agree at that moment where it's headed. But I always know that it doesn't matter what happened. There's always an AAJ who's here ready to back me up and support me. And I think that's something that's really great about the organization, right? Like, it's not just about, you continuously giving, but you could also take a break and come back whenever you want. We have a lot of great volunteers who did that. So I think it's really about the give-get that's really important. And, the more you give, the more you get back.
Well said. Well, we're close to time, and just for the last few minutes, just go around talking a little bit about, what would you tell someone, an AAJ member out there, if they're watching this, if they're on the fence about whether or not to step up and either run for national office or run for a national president, what is like the pitch that you'd give to them? Doris?
Well, I would say you don't necessarily have to start with running for national president. There are other ways to be involved in AAJA, and AAJA relies on the involvement of its members in many capacities, even those who don't have any official title. But, being president does require you to be the biggest cheerleader. And it does require a commitment of personal time and potentially personal finances. So you want to make sure that you're ready to step into that and ready to make those commitments. but there are so many people all over the world who are ready to support you as well. And there are so many people who have been in your shoes before. So, you know, Yvonne, Sharon, Paul, many presidents before us, we're all here to help you. You know, we're all here in your corner. We all want AAJA to thrive, and we all want to ensure your success. So I would say that if you have any questions, definitely reach out to us. It's easy to find any of us online.
Thanks. Paul?
You know, I would just say, just do it. I mean, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for you to really showcase the kind of skills that you have, and and how you want to make an impact in the industry in this very important moment in time where there's just not enough people of color in media. And this is basically a great way for you to not just step up, but to also showcase who you are and who we are as a community. So I think, if I have to do it all over again, I would not hesitate.
Sharon?
Yeah, I was pretty green when I ran for president. I feel really lucky because I ran unopposed because no one else really had the company support to do it, who were the obvious candidates. And I have a lot of respect for Doris and Paul in running campaigns in contested elections, because I actually think you become a better president because you're forced to do that. But knowing that, I feel like around this time when it comes time to file, people are like, who else is filing? And I don't want to file if someone else is going to file. I don't want to run a contested campaign. And if you're at all interested, like, you should really just jump in and file, because that fearlessness has energy. It has its own momentum. Right? As soon as I decided I was going to run and started talking to people about why I was running and hearing from them that they supported me, that automatically knocked out all other people who were possibly considering it. And I'm sure led to why is she? What? She's running? What? No one else is running against her? So I would say, there is a momentum and power and fearlessness in saying, that's what I want. Whether it is contested or not, whether I am going to win it for sure or not, I want to serve AAJ at this level.
Right. And I would point out that my first national election was also contested to be secretary in 2005. I did not win that race. It was a Janet Tu was a formidable opponent, and it was a great secretary. But I didn't then retreat because I didn't win that race. I doubled down. I got on the governing board. I served AAJ. I learned as much as I could. I ended up running uncontested for secretary 2 years later, but then I had to run a contested race to be reelected as secretary. So I've run 2 contested races for AAJ national office. And I think that every single one of those elections taught me something and made me really crystallize what I can do for AAJA.
Definitely. And as someone who has been working on a media startup where our philosophy is really just constantly trying to run as many experiments as possible and fail as quickly as possible, I would also encourage people to run, even if they're not exactly sure, because in the process of running, as Sharon was talking about, you'll learn so much about the organization and yourself. And AAJA is really the most supportive place to be pushing yourself and really trying to exceed your own expectations. And stepping into leadership positions, I think, is a very rare opportunity that comes up only once or twice because it's such a 2-year commitment. So it is very much worthwhile. And again, thank you all for joining us. I really appreciate it and was able to just learn so many fascinating stories about your experiences that I did not know before. And look forward to seeing you all in Houston in August.
Yay,
thanks, everyone.
Texas.
Thanks, Yvonne. Thanks,
Bye.
Paul.
Bye.